Hello, welcome to this video. Today we are going to talk about nutrients and digestion. So we're going to talk about how we digest the nutrients we eat and then what nutrients we should eat, why we should eat them, where we can find them, what they do in our body. Um, so let's get started. To start, who are we? Latinas Contra Cancer is a nonprofit organization in San Jose established in 2003 to provide cancer education, patient navigation, and psychosocial support to Latino families facing cancer. Our goal is to provide greater access to high quality medical care and to connect with other Latino support agencies. So, like I've done in the previous nutrition videos, I will be using this red pointer to point things out. And yeah, let's get started. So as a reminder from what should be the previous video in these nutrition series, as a summary and just to remind what we talked about before, the 6 essential nutrients we should consume are in order to live and to function properly are carbohydrates, fats, or lipids, proteins, minerals, vitamins, and water. We should 3/4 or 75% of what we should consume should be carbohydrates. It should be 50% fruits and vegetables and then 25% grains. So that makes 75% or 3/4 of carbohydrates. And we should eat that many carbohydrates because carbohydrates is where we get most of our energy, and we will find most minerals and vitamins in fruits, vegetables, and grains. The other 1/4 or 25% of what we should eat should be proteins. And fats are present kind of in everything. They're present a little bit in everything. So we will talk about in this presentation what these nutrients, all these 6 essential nutrients, what they are exactly and why we need them to live, so that you can be aware of why we need them, so that you understand that I'm not just making this up. It is all really necessary in our body. Now, I also don't want to teach you college level chemistry or biology. These nutrients are chemicals. It's all chemistry. And we don't need to get into depth about it, obviously. All you really need to know is just the basic knowledge of what we will talk today, so that it can help you navigate the different claims that you can hear from the news, from food advertisements, and stuff like that, because they use a lot of words that we'll cover today. And so I just want to make sure you can understand those so that you can be educated on these words, but we don't need to get super into it. So I say some things here and there. That's just for fun because I think it's interesting, but a lot of it, I just really want you to appreciate after the end of this presentation how complex our body is and how everything we eat is truly just meant to help our body function. We can't live off one thing. We need so many things for our body to function properly. Okay, so first, I want to introduce you to how it is that we get food into our cells. So these are the main parts of the digestive system. And the job of the digestive system is to break down what we eat into small molecules so that they can fit into our cells. So we obviously consume food through our mouth, and then it goes down to our stomach. Proteins begin to be broken down in the stomach. Carbohydrates and lipids would mostly stay whole in the stomach and then go down to the intestines along with the broken down proteins. And then carbohydrates and lipids begin to be broken down in the small intestine with the help of the liver and the pancreas. So they all work together. Once the protein, fats, and carbohydrates are broken down as small as possible, so I'm this is like in this picture, this is this small inside of the small intestine. So they're broken down as small as possible. These little figures are just the smallest that the proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids can be made. And once they're small, they get absorbed into the cells of our intestine, and then they get put into our bloodstream. Once in our bloodstream, all the nutrients that we broke down that were in our food can be taken to all the cells in our body, and all the cells can then turn those nutrients into energy that they need to work. So here I am representing a carbohydrate as this green shape, a hexagon, has 6 sides, so it's a hexagon. Our body uses glucose. Glucose is a carbohydrate, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But our body uses glucose as the main source of energy. So glucose would just enter the cell, and then through some steps, it would get turned into energy that our cell can use so that we can live. Now, all carbohydrates we eat can be turned into glucose. Glucose is like the main thing we turn into energy. But proteins and fats can be turned into energy if necessary, so they can end up making energy. Once we have reached the maximum amount of energy that our cells can handle at a time, we need to stop making energy, otherwise we'd explode because it can only handle so much energy at a time. So then we need to turn the food that we eat, the rest of the glucose or whatever that's in our body, we end up turning it into first something called glycogen, but we can only make so much of that. So we end up making it into fat. And then these fat molecules get transported into fat cells. When we directly eat fats, so like oil that we eat or fat from meat or something like that, when we directly eat fat, we can also transport those fat directly into a fat cell. So remember that an excess of fat under our skin and in our organs is what causes the health complications in people with obesity and overweight. So the key to maintaining our weight is to eat as much energy as you use. If we eat a lot more energy than we use, the energy is going to end up being stored as fat into fat cells. So now we're going to begin to talk about what each of the different nutrients are, what functions they have in our body, and why we should eat them in the different portions that I mentioned earlier. So let's start with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are also called sugars. Um, when you hear the word carb or carbohydrates and the word sugar, know that those are all the same thing. That's because the smallest unit of a carbohydrate is a sugar. So for example, the smallest unit of a notebook is a single sheet of paper, and a lot of sheets of paper put together make a whole notebook. These are the smallest units of carbohydrates. They're also called simple carbohydrates because it's just one. Simple carbohydrates can be the single sugars, or it can also be the just two sugars joined together, so really small units. So there are different kinds of sugar, just like there are different kinds of paper that can make a notebook. There can be lined paper, blank paper, etc. Sugars look like these shapes. Most of them are hexagons, so six-sided. The three sugars that are important for nutrition are glucose, fructose, and the lactose. Glucose is the sugar our body runs on, so that's what our body uses directly to make energy. Fructose is the sugar that is in fruit that makes fruit sweet. Fructose can be converted to glucose if necessary, but fructose, when taken in excess, is more directly turned into fat. The lactose is another sugar that can be converted to glucose when necessary. So these simple sugars, when joined together, can make two sugars, like two sugar carbohydrates. Um, Sucrose is actually what we know as table sugar. So like the sugar you put in your coffee. Sucrose is made of a glucose molecule and a fructose molecule. Now remember that fructose can be turned into fat, so therefore sucrose, when consumed in excess, can also be turned into fat because it's made of fructose. Finally, lactose is a sugar found in milk, and it is also made by a glucose molecule and a galactose molecule. Now, the carbohydrates that we find in vegetables and in bread and grains are complex carbohydrates. They're complex because they're long chains of individual sugars joined together, so they're really complicated, really complex. Well, these are simple, they're just the individual sugar units. Now, fructose, and by extension, sucrose, because again, sucrose is half fructose. So they are very interesting sugars that we hear a lot about in the news, and we hear about them when people talk about obesity and health, particularly because of something you probably heard of that's called high fructose corn syrup. Well, because fructose is the sweetest of the three sugars that I mentioned, it is a sugar that is used a lot in processed and manufactured products to make food taste sweeter and better. So when you hear the words added sugar, it's most likely some form of fructose. Now, I said that fructose is a sugar that we find in fruits. Um, so then you might ask, why should we eat so much fruit? Why should we eat fruits and vegetables if they can lead us to store it as excess fat because they have fructose? Well, actually, most fruits have a pretty low concentration of fructose than foods with added sugar. So low concentration means that out of the whole fruit, only a small part of it is actually fructose. A lot of fruits are mostly water, and they also have other nutrients like vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and water. But processed foods with added sugars have a lot more fructose and not a whole lot of other nutrients. So if you might remember from our last presentation, that those are processed foods with high concentrations of fructose are just empty calories. Now, we talked in the last, and then we will talk in the next presentation about how to know what foods we eat have added sugars and that stuff, and some words that you might see in processed products that basically mean that they have fructose or sucrose can be these. And these are all just the difference is that they come from different sources. Some come from a plant, specific fruit, synthetic forms, but they all are basically just fructose and sucrose. So we have agave syrup, concentrated fruit juice sweetener, white brown and confectioner's sugar, coconut sugar, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, honey, maple syrup, molasses, and nectars. So these are all really concentrated forms of fructose and sucrose that can be in processed foods in order to make them sweeter. Okay, some common terms that you might hear out there in the world when you read or hear about health and nutrition that are related to carbohydrates are things like fibers. So fibers are complex carbohydrates that come from seeds or other plants of other parts of a plant that our body cannot digest. Our body cannot break them down. There are two kinds of fibers, soluble and insoluble. The difference is that soluble fibers can interact with water and the other ones can't. And that just means that they're going to interact with our body in different ways. So we should worry about eating fiber because there are actually a lot of benefits to eating fiber, even though we can't digest it. Although we won't die if we don't eat enough fiber within a week or something, there are many cases where people have complications because of not eating enough fiber for a long time. Some of the benefits of fibers is that it slows glucose absorption so that we stay feeling full and not hungry longer. It nourishes our gut bacteria, and our gut bacteria is super important for maintaining a healthy, well-functioning digestive system. Fibers also support our immunity and reduce inflammation, which might explain why consuming enough fiber has been shown to reduce the risk of colon cancer. And we can find some fiber and mostly plant products, avocados, potatoes, some greens, fruits, seeds, a lot of seeds. Something else you might hear out there is the word whole grain. A whole grain is basically what it sounds. It is a grain that is whole, that is complete. This picture here shows us what a complete grain looks like. It has all these layers, the germ, endosperm, bran, and husk. So it has a lot of layers. And these layers, especially the outer ones, contain the most nutrients, that contain the most vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, all the things that we need to survive. So that's why we should consume mostly whole grains. As an example, I'm sure you have heard about how we should eat brown rice instead of white rice, and that is because brown rice is a whole grain. It has most of the outer layers, while white rice only has the endosperm, this white part, and the endosperm is the least nutritious part. The reason that grains that aren't whole exist right now is because of the way that that we get the white rice, for example, is the cheapest, easier, and quickest way to process the grain. And so that ends up ruining the outer layers. And that was what happens in the US because it's cheaper, quicker, and easier. We end up getting these processed grains. So then we have unenriched grains. That's what they're called when they are processed, and the outer layers get removed because of the process of getting them. The government eventually realized that unenriched grains are really bad because we need the vitamins and minerals in the outer layers to survive. So now there is a law that requires manufacturers to add nutrients back into the flour or the grain. So that's called enriched or fortified grains or flours. But keep in mind that these would be vitamins and minerals that were added by a human rather than that come naturally from the. So whole grains are better for us than processed grains, but enriched grains are good enough since they have added nutrients, and unenriched grains are the worst because they have almost no nutrients. Now, whole grains can definitely be expensive if you've noticed. So the recommendation is actually just that at least half of what the grains you eat should be whole grains. You can see here that a piece of bread how a piece of bread differs in the nutrients that it has based on what kind of flour it's made from. The whole grain is the purplish color. The enriched white bread is the green color, and the unenriched white bread is the orange color. And you can see that we have a bunch of nutrients here: iron, thiamine, vitamins, magnesium, zinc. You can see that the whole grains and the enriched white bread have the most, but that their whole grain is the one that has the most out of all of these. The enriched white bread is missing a bit of some. It doesn't have a lot of vitamin B6, doesn't have a lot of fiber, doesn't have a lot of magnesium or zinc. But the unenriched white bread has almost not a lot, almost none for all of these. So again, whole grain is the best, but enriched is the next best choice, and unenriched would be really bad because you're definitely not getting a lot of nutrients out of that. So why do we eat carbohydrates? Well, like I said before, carbohydrates, especially glucose, is what our body directly uses to make energy, and we need energy for absolutely everything that our body does. Carbohydrates are also building materials for our cells. They help our cells function. They help our gut be healthy and work properly, and they also help us feel full and satisfied. Moving on to proteins, the simplest unit of a protein is called an amino acid, which I have represented here with a circle. So amino acids would be like the single sheet of paper, and the protein would be the notebook. So the amino acid is just the smallest unit of a protein. So a single big protein is made of many amino acids joined together, like this chain shown here. There are a total of 21 amino acids in the world, and our body can make some of them on its own, but it can't make all of them. So what are called essential amino acids are amino acids that our body can't not make on its own. So we have to get them from the food we eat. These are the names of the essential amino acids that we need to get from our food. It's not super important to know them. This is just the reason why we have to eat proteins in order to survive, because we can't make these amino acids. We have to eat them. And we need to eat them to survive because our body basically runs by proteins. So like if our body was a restaurant, all the staff, the cooks, the servers, the janitors, the food being served would be proteins. And the paychecks for the staff would be the energy we make from the carbohydrates. So our body basically runs on proteins. We can't live without proteins. In fact, the purpose of our DNA is to command the production of proteins that will make our body work properly. And in order to make proteins, we need all of the amino acids. So that's why we need to eat proteins. Antibodies are also proteins, and that's for our immune system. So we need proteins for an immune system. Enzymes or hormones are also proteins. Proteins also help give structure to our cells and help them transport stuff around. They basically do everything. So proteins are very, very important. Now, fats and lipids are kind of a lot of things. There are many molecules that fall under the term fat or lipid. Here, I just pictured 3 examples. But basically, fat is something that cannot interact with water. That's the definition of fat, pretty much. So when you pour oil, for example, if you pour oil in water, it stays separated into another layer because it is a fat that cannot interact with water. So this is a fatty acid right here, and which is usually what we end up thinking as a fat or a lipid. This is a triglyceride. That's what it's called, a triglyceride, and it's basically just 3 fatty acids put together. We store fat in our body as triglycerides. We store them into fat cells, as you can see in this diagram. A fat cell is just a cell whose main job is to keep a bunch of these triglycerides inside it. A lot of fat cells make the layers of fat we have under our skin and that we have inside our organs. So lipids are important in our body, very important in the right amounts. So lipids have a lot of dormant energy, so we can use them to store energy in the fat cells. The layers of fat under our skin also keep us warm and squishy rather than cold and rigid. Our cells are also possible because of the membrane that surrounds them. So this is an example of the cell membrane. The cell membrane is made of these lipids, these little circles with like little legs. Those are lipids as well. The cell membrane is super important. It's like the peel of a banana. The banana can't live on its own for a long time without the peel. Lipids are also the building blocks for cells. They can help transport nutrients around our body. So they're very, very important in the right amounts again. Now you have maybe heard about saturated versus unsaturated fats. A saturated fat is basically just a straight fat, like this one. It's just a straight fat. And unsaturated fat is a fat that is bent. So these are bent. A saturated, I'm sorry, being straight, like the saturated fat, being straight allows saturated fats to get close together and become solid when it's not hot. So butter, for example, and meat fat, those are saturated fats because they are solid at room temperature. Since unsaturated fats are bent, they can't get as close together, so they are liquid at room temperature. Unsaturated fatty acids or fats also include omega fatty acids like omega-3 and omega-6, which you might have heard are healthy fats, which are found in fish and other good foods. So it turns out that unsaturated fats are better for our health than saturated fats. So the property that makes saturated fats solidify can clog our blood vessels and do other stuff to our body that can lead to health complications. So saturated fats don't do a lot of great stuff for our heart health. And we actually tend to consume unsaturated fats from sources that aren't super essential to our health. So you can see the circle 35. This is all the sources of saturated fats in American diets. So you can see a big part of the circle is stuff like pizza, burgers, right? Like white rice, pasta, meat. So not super necessary to eat pizza and burgers. Snacks and sweets is another huge chunk of this circle. So we get a lot of our saturated fats from snacks and sweets. So there's definitely space in our diet to cut back on these bad. There's also evidence that unsaturated fats improve our health. So there is a lot of evidence that they reduce inflammation, which is good to prevent cancer, and they reduce the risk of heart disease. Now, the last thing I want to say about fats is about trans fats. So you might have heard out there in the news and other places that trans fats are bad for you. And I just want to explain why. So a reason that there are a lot of saturated fats in those categories like pizza, fast food, snacks, and sweets is because saturated fats, which again are the straight fats, make food last longer. So manufacturers want to make saturated fats so that their food lasts longer. It would be bad if the bag of chips that you buy went bad after a single day. So people came up with this method to make unsaturated fats turn them into saturated fats. And it works. People can turn in a lab, they can turn unsaturated fats into saturated fats. But this method also ends up making some small amounts of this trans fat. So a trans fat has this connection here, this double line, kind of like an unsaturated, except that in a trans fat, it still allows it to be straight rather than bent. So a trans fat, it has this double line here like an unsaturated fat, but it's straight, it's not bent. So it turns out that having this structure here while being straight makes this molecule do bad things in our bodies. There is a lot of evidence that trans fats have the same or worst effect as saturated fats in our health. So the recommendation from places like the World Health Organization is actually to cut out our consumption of trans fat from our diets completely. And trans fats don't happen in natural food. So they don't happen in nature. They happen in food that has been manipulated by humans, so processed foods. Okay, so we're gonna end talking about minerals, vitamins, and water. There are a lot of vitamins and minerals, and there is really no reason for you to memorize them all. So we are gonna speed through this section. I really just want you to appreciate that there are a lot of vitamins and minerals that we need that do a lot of stuff in our body that is just necessary. We would die without them, and that they're mostly found in fruits and vegetables. So those are the take-home messages I want you to get from this minerals and vitamins section. Okay, so water is really important. All the chemical reactions that make our body function require water to happen. So we need to consume water every day. This is just a list of some conditions that require a person to drink more water because they can lose water through sweat, peeing, or other forms. So for example, if you drink alcohol, if you have kidney disease, if you live somewhere really hot, if you're pregnant, etc., you would need to drink more water. Now, the best place to get your water is from 100% water, so the sink, water bottle, real water. But there is water in other products like soda, vegetables and fruits have water in them. Butter has water, bread has water because you make bread with water. So a lot of things can have water in them, but the best source to get water is just 100% water. Now, minerals are molecules that we need only in very small amounts. So we really need very, very small amounts of them, but not getting enough of them can actually have really serious side effects in our health because they're really important. So these are the main minerals our body needs in order to survive. So we have calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sodium, chloride, magnesium, and these we really need in very small amounts. So iron, zinc, copper, manganese, iodine, and selenium. I'm only going to walk through like the first few. You can always look up on Google each of these and see sources for them so you can see where you can find them in food. So for all the vitamins and minerals, I have these little snapshots of important things about each vitamin or mineral. So how much you should consume every day, the maximum you should consume, why they're important in our body, symptoms, what happens if you don't get enough of them, and then symptoms and what happens if you get too much of them, and then some sources. These are not all the sources you can find them in. There are obviously more food sources, but these are some examples. You can always look up on Google sources of, and then put whatever you want to find. Okay, so calcium is important to make our bones to make our bones so that they can grow and for us to move our muscles and for our brain to work properly. So super important. We can find calcium in sardines with bones and dairy products like yogurt, milk, and cheese, turnip greens, and tofu. And again, these are not the only places you can find, just some examples. Now, phosphorus is necessary for making our bones, for making our DNA, for allowing us to get energy out of food, for keeping our blood from becoming too acidic. We can find it in things like cottage cheese, milk, navy beans, salmon, steak, and sunflower seeds. Magnesium is necessary for our bones, for our heart to function, for our immune system to function, to move our muscles, and for our brain to work properly as well. We can find it in places like spinach, soy products, black beans, yogurt, and sunflower seeds. Iron is necessary for us to use the oxygen that we breathe and for us to extract energy from our food. We can find iron in clams, steak, beans, spinach, chard. Potassium is necessary for us to manage liquid in our body. It allows us to power our cells, it helps our brain work and our muscles move. We can find it in places like orange juice, butternut squash, salmon, potatoes, and avocado. Now, chloride and sodium were the other major minerals we need, but I think you got the point that minerals are very important in our body and they are everywhere. Now, the problem with sodium, though, is that Americans eat too much of it. So we tend to not have enough of the other minerals, but we consume way too much sodium. And sodium is also salt, but you can find sodium in other things. You can see here that in this graph, these red lines, this is what you should take in sodium, so the recommended amount, and this other line is the maximum you should take. And you can see for both males and females and adults in the US, it's way higher than the red line. So we are consuming way too much sodium, and that it just doesn't have a great health consequences. So having that too much sodium can increase the risks for hypertension, heart disease, stroke, kidney disease, and cancer as well. So watch out for sodium ingredients in packaged foods. Finally, the vitamins are molecules that we need to consume to survive, and they assist in a lot of processes in our body. There are fat-soluble vitamins and water-soluble vitamins. The fat-soluble are vitamin A, D, E, and K, and the water-soluble vitamins are B vitamins and C vitamin. And the B vitamins are many kinds. They are either called B1, 2, whatever by their numbers, or they have individual names as well. Here are some things that vitamins do to help us live. They help us absorb things like the absorption of nutrients into our blood. They help us transfer stuff across our bodies. It says here that we need the B and C vitamins more frequently because we lose them when we pee. So they get flushed out of our body eventually once they make the round. Well, we don't really need to consume the fat soluble vitamins as much, only weekly or even monthly. And supplements are not a great source of getting your vitamins because it can lead to toxicity of the vitamins. So if you consume too much of them, it can cause issues in your body as well. So it can cause issues if you don't have enough, but it can also cause issues if you have too much. So watch out for supplements. Now, vitamin A and beta carotene, which are basically the same things, are necessary for our vision, for our skin, for our growth, for having kids, and for our immunity. Here are some symptoms of vitamin A toxicity if you have too much through a supplement, just for your information. We can find vitamin A in milk, carrots, sweet potatoes, apricots, basically orange foods, and also beef, spinach, and bok choy. And again, these are just some examples of the sources for the vitamins. Vitamin, oops, I did something. Vitamin D is necessary for our bones, for our digestive system to work properly, and for our kidneys. Again, here are some symptoms of toxicity. We can find vitamin D in sardines, salmon, sunlight, milk, and tuna. Sunlight because our body has a way to turn sunlight into vitamin D. Vitamin E is a great antioxidant, and that just means that it protects us against harmful molecules, and that is very important in cancer. We can find vitamin E in sunflower seeds, whole grains, and apparently raw canola oil, which I think is interesting. Vitamin K is necessary for our blood clotting properly and for our bones. We can find it in cabbage, kale, spinach, other greens, and soybeans. So lots of green foods. Vitamin C is necessary for our blood vessels, for our immune system, and it also is an antioxidant. We can find it in bell peppers, Brussels sprouts, citruses, berries, broccoli, and sweet potatoes. Now, there are the B vitamins. These are their individual names: thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, folate, biotin, others. B vitamins do a lot in our body. Here, it just shows you where each of them do some work and where they're necessary. So we need them for our bones, for our muscle, for our brain to function properly, for our digestive system. So B vitamins, very important. Here are some examples of them and what each of them do individually. If you're interested, we can find B vitamins in dairy products, beef, chicken, pork, mushrooms, potatoes, enriched flours, green peas, seeds, spinach, lentils, avocados, and of course, much, much more. And that's the end. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you stuck through it. Again, I just really want you to, I don't want you to sit and think like, am I getting all of these specific molecules and vitamins and minerals? I just want you to appreciate how complex our body is, how everything we eat does get turned into something in our body. So what we put in our body is really important because we just want to nourish it and help it to work properly so we can feel good and healthy. So beware of supplements, avoid added sugar, saturated and trans fats, excess sodium and processed grains. And as I said in the previous presentation, eat the rainbow. Just you don't have to sit and think if you're eating all the little things, but if you eat the rainbow, if you eat a variety of foods, if you eat different colors, then it's really hard to not get enough of everything that you need. Again, more presentations coming soon. Next, we will talk about how to navigate shopping in a grocery store nowadays because there's a lot of information you could use to not only see what you're really eating and then minimize costs and eat efficiently or buy efficiently. So we'll talk about that next time. And then we'll also have like live cooking soon. So if you have any questions, please visit us at our website. Thank you so much. Please share all this information with your family, all these presentations. Nutrition is so, so important for our health and for the prevention of cancer, which is what this organization really focuses on. So please share this information with your family and your loved ones. Thank you so much for watching.